Hello, everyone. We just finished meeting with Dr. Sharkey, our public health officer. Dr. Sharkey has a master's in public health that focuses on vaccinations, so she is an authority on the subject. She shared with us a presentation that was created by Dr. Dillahay with the Department of Health. She expounds on the presentation and shares with us some of the local data. After that, she follows up with a question and answer session. I think you will find both the presentation and the question and answer session to be quite enlightening. I hope she answers any questions that you may have. Without further ado, here's Dr. Sharkey.
But here is our county level data through Tuesday. I don't have Wednesday up here, but it didn't change a whole lot yesterday. As you can see, we are at by far the highest levels of our epidemic here locally. So this is our July surge. This is the weather's getting cold. This decrease right here is when people were not getting tested over Thanksgiving during that long weekend. So even though this looks like there was a dip, there really wasn't. It was just just people weren't testing. And this is our post-Thanksgiving surge. And what we're seeing now at today, and in Fayetteville, at my clinic, at clinics throughout the area, we're seeing record number of people being tested today. I was over my previous high level of testing today by almost 30%. So we're seeing some astronomical numbers going on right now that I think will be reflected in the data in the next couple of days. So expect surge upon surge here. We're expecting these numbers to climb even higher over the next couple of days, and that's before people get together for Christmas. So it's always darkest before the light, and I think that's where we are. So that's kind of where we are at the moment. Let's go back in time. So almost a year ago, on December 30th, was when the cluster of pneumonias were kind of identified as, from an epidemiologic standpoint, something abnormal is going on here, and something we need to pay attention. That was December 30th that was identified. Now, you can go back and look. There was clearly something going on before December 30th. And the ophthalmologist that first raised the alarm in mid-December in China, in Wuhan, because people were presenting with pink eye and then dying. He tried to raise the alarm and was basically shut down by the government. And unfortunately, he subsequently died of COVID in the spring. January 7th, and less than that, it's DNA sequenced. So this rapid result was just due to years and years and years of genetic study going on and us doing the Human DNA Genome Project, that we were able to do that. So good basic science that we had in place was able to let us sequence the virus very quickly. And with that, from the DNA, they were able to identify the portion that coded for that spike protein that we see in the pictures of the virus. And we'll kind of focus in on that more here in just a second. And then from 2 months after that, so by March 16th, we were able to start the first human subject being dosed with the SARS-CoV-2 vaccine candidates, both Moderna and Pfizer. So even though they only have followed in phase 3 trials, the study participants for a couple months, we actually have individuals on this earth that were vaccinated 9 months ago. So we do have, a little bit of longer term data, but these were small numbers initially. So that was our first dose, March 16th, 2022, and then December 16th, 2020. December 16th, 2020, we had our first people vaccinated in Fayetteville. So very exciting times. So this is electron microscope of coronaviruses. This is not COVID, but these are other coronavirus types that there are. So there are 4 types of coronavirus that circulate in humans that just cause the common cold. And these are very common in children. And what we think is going on is that children have high antibody levels to these viruses. And that is part of the reason why we are seeing such low morbidity and mortality in kids, is they actually have some cross reactivity from being infected, with their snotty noses that they're getting at daycare and kindergarten, is providing them with some level of protection from COVID. Now, we've had 3 coronaviruses that have jumped from animals to humans in the past several years that have caused some concern. And those are SARS, MERS, and then COVID. So SARS came from the palm civet cat to humans. And SARS just was not able to be spread from person to person very well at all. It wasn't happening. So it was just not very contagious. MERS, more contagious, but we were able to contain it with very quick resources. And now we have COVID that has come from the bat, presumably. They're pretty sure right now that it was the bat that it came from. And MERS came from a camel. So they're just very interesting zoonotic viruses that jump from animals to humans. We do not know where or when these coronaviruses jump from animals to humans. I would love to know, but that's not known at this time. So this is the COVID virus that we were so used to seeing. And there's all sorts of proteins here on this virus, but the S protein, or the spike protein, is the important one. This spike protein, and we'll look at it even closer, is what locks onto the ACE2 receptors that we have throughout our body and causes the virus to inoculate us and get us sick. So this S protein is the one in question. And we make antibodies to this E protein, this M protein. We make it to the surface of the virus, but those antibodies don't do any good. They don't block the virus from doing anything. It is the antibodies we make to this S protein that block it from binding to our cells that cause us to be able to have resistance and immunity to the virus. So that's the one we have in question. So when we talk about neutralizing antibodies, it's the S protein antibodies that we want. Those are the good ones. All these other ones, they're there, but they don't help us much. So on those antibody testing that we heard about, if they're just testing for any antibody, not specifically this S protein antibody. So we don't know how much good they're doing us. So you can have antibodies to the other parts of the virus, but if it's not to that S protein, they don't do you any good. So this is looking in more detail at that spike protein, and it's made up of different subunits, and it's this portion right here that adheres to and locks onto the ACE2 receptor like a key and opens up the cell so that the virus can infect it. So here's what that looks like. And as you can see, it just matches like a hand in a glove. So it latches onto that ACE2 receptor and infects that cell. Now, the kicker is we have ACE2 receptors throughout our body. We have them in our lungs, in our gut, in our nervous system. So this virus can infect almost any tissue in the human body, which is why we're seeing such bizarre and different presentations of COVID. We're having the fatigue, the loss of taste and smell, the cough. In kids in particular, a lot of abdominal upset, a lot of diarrhea. Adults, not so much. So it really varies in its presentation. So anything right now can be COVID. I have a patient that presented with fever and a rash, and that was it. And the mom was wanting me just to do a telehealth appointment. And I was like, no, you got to go get tested. And she didn't believe me. And we just found out about an hour ago, it was indeed COVID. So it can present in any number of ways, as opposed to some other viruses. So let's take hepatitis B, for example. Hepatitis B virus only can infect cells in the liver, causing hepatitis. It doesn't present any other way. So it really depends on what type of cell the virus can infect, what we see with it. And this one is tricky and very smart about being able to infect so many different types of cells throughout our body. But the good news is that this spike protein, very stable. We are not seeing it mutate at all. And so because of that, these vaccines are proven to be highly efficacious. And I want to step back and talk even more basic science here about messenger RNA. So we need to remember and remind ourselves from biochemistry and biology what it does. So our DNA in this standard double helix model that we all know opens up and gets translated into messenger RNA and transfer RNA. And messenger RNA and transfer RNA leave the nucleus and go out into the body of the cell and latch onto the ribosomes. And the messenger RNA goes one way, the tRNA goes right here, and it starts basically knitting proteins. So this is a polypeptide chain or a protein. So your DNA gets translated to messenger RNA, which gets transcribed into proteins. Once transfer RNA and messenger RNA are made and leave the nucleus, it cannot go back into the nucleus and interact with the DNA. This is a one-way road. So RNA does not go back in the nucleus and do anything with the DNA. And I think that's a really important point to understand, because people hear messenger RNA and it's a genetic code and it's gonna, who knows what it's gonna do to our genes. It's not gonna do anything. It's gonna go land on a ribosome and get made into and make these spike proteins, and then it's gonna degrade and go away. It's not gonna do anything else. It cannot go into the nucleus. So right now there are different vaccines in different phases. And the ones that, as we all know, the Pfizer one is mRNA, as is Moderna. And I have not been watching the news to see if the FDA made any rulings today on Moderna. But they are both mRNA vaccines that use our body to make the spike proteins. And those spike proteins are then all of our cells that it infects will have these spike proteins on its surface and will make antibodies to it. And that's why it is showing such high efficacy. Now, the AstraZeneca that is being made in conjunction with Oxford, as well as the Johnson & Johnson or Janssen vaccines, they are both mRNA injected into an adenoviral vector. So it's actually a non-replicating virus that is used to infect our cells, deliver the mRNA, and cause, again, the spike protein to be produced and then antibodies. And then there are some other vaccines that are in later or earlier stage trials that aren't anywhere near coming to market, where basically it's just purified spike protein is put into the body for us to make antibodies to. But those aren't anywhere near being come to market. So we really need to focus on these two pathways, are what we're all likely to be vaccinated with in at least the next 6 months or so. So vaccine studies, everybody thinks that this was rushed, and it was very quick. And it's very quick for a couple of reasons that we'll go into. There are 4 phases of vaccine studies. Most of us think it ends at phase 3 once it gets licensed. but that is not the case. So phase 1 is just, we have a vaccine candidate. We think it might work. We need to see if it's even safe. Like, we need to just inject it and make sure that nobody, literally drops dead or has some bizarre reaction to it. So these are very small numbers of healthy humans that are just given the vaccine to make sure there's nothing serious as far as a safety profile goes. Then the next is a larger group looking at efficacy, figuring out the dosage, and safety evaluations. Once they get the dosage figured out, they go to a larger group and evaluate that safety and efficacy. And then if they're licensed, they go into post-licensure studies, and these go on into perpetuity. We never stop looking at vaccine safety and efficacy and what we can expect long-term from the vaccine. So we are always monitoring these phase 4 studies, and really the CDC is doing all this. They're watching it all very closely for any adverse events. So the traditional development pathway is the design and exploratory preclinical studies. These usually are years. They're looking at animal models, trying to figure out what approach is going to work in this animal model. Is it going to be safe to inject into humans? And then they develop their study model and they submit it to a board that decides if it's safe to go forward into humans. And then they have to enroll phase 1 participants. So you can imagine with a lot of these vaccines, especially for a rare disease, it's really hard to recruit study participants. With the COVID vaccine, it wasn't hard at all. I mean, most of the slots were filled up in hours. So what would normally take years to recruit enough study participants was not an issue. And they would move along. After phase 1, you'd have to stop. You'd have to get permission again to move to phase 2, phase 3. Then you'd submit it to the FDA, which you get put in the bottom of the pile as they work through everything else, and then finally get a review, and then start production, and then market, and then finally get to where you're injecting humans. This could take a long time. The shortest that was ever done was mumps, and that was 4 years prior to COVID. So what happened? What did we do with COVID? We had the pre-existing animal models because of SARS and MERS. So that part was done. We had the genetic makeup done by January 13th. So they did the animal studies based off what had been done before with SARS and MERS, submitted their plans, and then what they did was they overlapped these phases. They didn't skip any steps, but they did phase 1, and as long as everything was going smoothly, started phase 2, but they still reviewed this data in here, and then continued phase 2. And then once they got permission to go to phase 3, and phase 2 and phase 3 really didn't overlap, they would start production and before it was even licensed. And that was a risky move. You would never do that before for a vaccine. They submitted their paperwork for licensure. Of course, they went to the front of the pile and had everybody looking at it. And the FDA has actually been working in round the clock, just like y'all do, 24-hour shifts. Nobody's been getting a break. They've been doing 24-hour evaluation of all the data just to make sure that they were not missing anything. So while it was fast, there were reasons it was fast, but no steps were skipped at all. So let's talk about the vaccines that we have. The Pfizer vaccine is the one that we have started vaccinating here in the US with this week. It's the mRNA vaccine. It has a 95% efficacy, which is just crazy good. The only vaccine on market that has that good of an efficacy is the measles, mumps, and rubella. Nobody ever dreamt that we were going to hit that. It does require 2 doses, 21 days apart. It has to be diluted prior to injection. It requires that ultra cold chain storage. And so it's a tricky one. It is not an easy one to get out from a logistics standpoint. Pfizer had promised 50 million doses to the US by the end of the year. Looks like we may not be getting that. Looks like they're really, production is not being able to be ramped up at quite the level we wanted it to. But Pfizer has an excellent track record of vaccine development. They've done this for years. They have many vaccines on the market. They're a longstanding player in the vaccine world. Now, the Moderna vaccine is also an mRNA vaccine. Similar efficacy, no serious cases in the vaccination arm, and it's 2 doses, 28 days apart. It's a little bit easier to handle than the Pfizer. It just requires a normal freezer to maintain it. Just so y'all know, the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, as well as the chickenpox vaccine, also require freezers for their storage. So we're used to handling these types of vaccines that require just your standard freezer, and all other vaccines that are on the market are just a regular refrigerator. Moderna has promised 20 million doses by the end of the year, and it looks like they're going to be able to deliver that from what we're hearing right now. That we have not had at this time last week, we were starting to hear our dosage, what we were expecting being cut. Moderna is not, and we're hearing that we're getting more doses than we expected, which is wonderful. Interestingly, Moderna doesn't have, it's a new company. It doesn't have any licensed vaccines. They have a lot of ones that are being developed, but this is the first one that has come to, if it does get approved, come to market. The AstraZeneca vaccine that is being developed with Oxford is one of the adenoviral vector vaccines. It is also 2 doses. And they had a little hiccup in their study, in which part of their study participants in the phase 3 trial got a half dose for their first dose and then the full strength dose on their second dose. And what they found was that the ones that got 2 full doses, the efficacy was 62%, while those that had gotten a low first dose and a full strength second dose by accident, the efficacy was 90%. So the FDA said, you got to go back and do all that over. We got to figure out what's going on here. So they're starting phase 3 somewhat over and doing everybody with like a priming dose, lower dose the first one, and then the full strength dose the second one, and hoping that data will replicate that 90% that they saw in those that had accidentally gotten the wrong dose. But it was hopefully a happy outcome, because that's a much better efficacy than 62%. And then Johnson & Johnson, this one is the one that I'm really excited about. It is another adenovirus vector vaccine. However, it only requires 1 dose, and it's refrigerator storage. So it's going to be really easy to give to lots and lots of people and vaccinate quickly. However, we don't have any data on it yet. We do not know its safety. We do not know its efficacy. They are promising 100 million doses to the US in 2021. And Johnson & Johnson is the one that has developed SARS, MERS, and Ebola vaccines. So they're a legitimate player here. So I'm hoping that with that experience and what they know, that the efficacy of this vaccine is indeed high, because it's going to be one that we can really vaccinate the vast majority of our population with. Safety is paramount in the development of these vaccines. You know, the FDA, the CDC, everybody playing in this knows that people are going to be anxious about it. So they have not skipped any steps. There are 3 different bodies looking at the safety. So the FDA committee that is looking at the Moderna today, the CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, or the ACIP, which actually Dr. Jose Romero at Arkansas Children's, and our Secretary of Health for the state, he's actually chair of this major national conference committee. And it just happened to be that he was chair when COVID hit. So he is chair of that, so he is really deep into all the safety data, and they'll be meeting again this weekend to discuss Moderna. And then there's an independent data and safety monitoring board. This is the board that is monitoring the safety during the clinical trials. So they have access to all the data. They know who's in the placebo group and who's not. They are not blinded. So they're, if they see anything wrong. So when you hear of trials being halted, it's this monitoring the board that's like, hold on just a second, something happened here. We got to make sure we're safe before we continue on. So there's lots of people, lots of eyes, everybody's eyes looking at this. So once a vaccine gets a EUA approval, they're going to keep monitoring and assessing it and try to get full FDA approval, with the plan being, like right now, the Pfizer vaccine should have full FDA approval by February. So, and presumably then Moderna too, if everything goes well. So they're still following everything, looking at all the data very closely. So this is ongoing. And then I want to touch a little bit on specifically the VAERS system, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. So every vaccine that's given in the US, there is a 75% surcharge tax fee that goes into the VAERS system. So that is a pool of money that's set aside. So let's use Guillain-Barré syndrome, for example, which is a known potential complication of the flu vaccine. If you get that, the VAERS system then will pay for all of your medical bills going forward. And that system for reporting, if I see somebody that I vaccinate in my clinic that has an adverse reaction, I am obligated to report them to the VAERS system, and then they're tracked by the CDC going forward. So this system has been in place since the 1990s, when we were seeing some pretty significant reactions to the wholesale pertussis vaccine. And as a result of that, we now have what we call the acellular pertussis vaccine. It was also involved in the rotavirus vaccine that in the late 90s was the first one that came to market, was shown to result in intussusception, which is basically where the bowels telescope on themselves. Very dangerous, very scary complication. And the VAERS system picked up on that really quickly, that it was happening with the first rotavirus vaccine. So it was pulled from the market very quickly. So there's these other ones, the Vaccine Safety Data Link, post-licensure, rapid immunization safety monitoring, and the CISA. All of these are watching the vaccine and looking at the adverse events. So there's a lot, again, everybody's eyes are on this. So we're not gonna be very difficult for anything to get by anybody right now. So it's a very robust system that's been in place for decades and decades. Locally, as we know, the hospital workers are getting vaccinated first with Pfizer, and the nursing home and residents and staff in Arkansas are going to get the Moderna. And we're doing that because Moderna is just easier to get to the nursing homes. It doesn't have the cold storage, it's fewer doses, it's just easier to deal with. Right now, if everything goes smoothly, we're supposed to get 45,000 doses of Moderna next week in Arkansas, which should vaccinate our entire population of nursing home residents and staff, which will be wonderful. Where we're seeing such high morbidity and mortality is in the nursing home. So if we can get that population vaccinated, that's going to help the strain on our hospital staff. It's going to help our morbidity and mortality strain data. And it's going to make all of us feel a little bit safer about if we have loved ones staying in those types of facilities. And the next phase is when you and I will be getting healthcare workers and first responders, along with residents of long-term care facilities. Right now, my best guess is that we're 2 to 3 weeks away from that phase for where we'll be moving out of the hospitals and nursing homes. The city of Fayetteville, along with the Board of Health, and purchased a minus 70-degree freezer to loan to Washington Regional, the county pharmacies, whoever needs it the most. Right now, it's at Washington Regional. Once we get their staff vaccinated, we'll move it to the next place that needs it the most, whether that is Colliers or community clinic or wherever we decide we need it. If we decide to do a bigger vaccine campaign at the fairgrounds, we'll take it there. Wherever it is needed is just a gift to the region from really the mayor. We have to thank for that. The city of Fayetteville, Brad also worked very hard on getting that so that we can make sure that we can get everybody vaccinated safely just as quickly as possible. So our goal here is herd immunity. So the population of Washington County is 239,187. So 70% of that would be 167,431 people. And right now we have a whopping 1,950 doses. So we are 0.8% of the way to herd immunity. So we're going to get there. There's going to be bumps in the road. There's going to be hiccups. There's going to be questions and concerns that we just hope we can address as it comes along. And that is my presentation for y'all today. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and answer any questions.
You mentioned in a previous talk that you had about the anaphylactic shock. Can you go over that?
Yes. So there have been, with the Pfizer vaccine, and this was post-license or post-emergency use, whatever they have in the UK that's their equivalent, that they were seeing 2 cases, and it's still just those 2 that happened the first day in the UK, of recipients of the Pfizer vaccine that had a history of severe anaphylaxis, that had a severe allergic reaction to the vaccine. So for right now, we are recommending that anybody with a history of severe allergic reaction, it requires them carrying an EpiPen, et cetera, that they not receive the Pfizer vaccine. And right now, my gut tells me you shouldn't get the Moderna vaccine either, because they're very, very similar. And we need to wait for those people to find a safer vaccine or get more information about what happened with those 2 individuals in the UK.
And the Johnson & Johnson, is it likely to be more safe as far as anaphylactic shock, or unknown at this point?
It's unknown at this point. Again, this is gut, this is not science. But because it is in a viral vector, kind of ironically, I think it's going to be safer. It is not in the lipoprotein that the Moderna and the Pfizer is in. So I think that it will be potentially safer.
Who else has questions?
Chief, I got one if you can hear me all right.
Yes.
As far as regular, you get the dose, what is normally to be expected as far as normal side effects? Like, am I going to get a fever? Do I need to be out of work for a day or 2? Do I need to stay away from people?
You do not need to stay away from people. You're not contagious. You might have a fever. You might have some body aches. You might have some soreness at the injection site. Kind of similar to a flu vaccine, but my understanding may be a little bit more so than a flu vaccine, and that it is the reaction can be more intense with the second dose. And that is your body's responding. It's making those antibodies. It's doing what we want it to do. So it's not a bad thing. We want to see that. If you get the dose and don't feel anything, that could be a sign that you're a vaccine non-responder, which we don't want you to be. We want you to respond to the vaccine. That being said, with your workforce, Chief Harden, you really want to look at staggering how you're going to do the vaccine. This is what we're recommending that's why Washington Regional is doing their vaccine clinics every 3 days, so that they're not vaccinating everybody, and then the next day everybody's like, I don't feel so good, I have a fever, and not being out of work. So you might want to look at how you're at your staffing when you get the vaccine. That's going to be important. But you're not contagious. The other thing is, I do not recommend you getting or taking any Tylenol or ibuprofen the first day or before you get the vaccine, because when you do that, you're blunting your immune response to the vaccine. So you'll see lower antibody titers. So we're recommending that the 24 hours after you get your first dose, you can take some if you need it, but kind of baby yourself through it. Just to keep telling yourself, we're making antibodies, mind over matter, as far as not taking that and kind of messing through those symptoms that you're having.
Awesome. And I have just one follow-up to that, and then I'll be done. I haven't gotten, this is just me personally, I haven't got COVID tested. I haven't had a reason to, I haven't been exposed or anything. In order to get this vaccine, do you need to get tested first to make sure you don't have the antibodies? Is there anything?
No, no, you do not. Now, the one thing that we are asking people is, if you have had COVID within the past 90 days, not to get the vaccine immediately. And the reason for that is that means you have some antibodies to COVID, and you don't need to be at the front of the line for the vaccine. You can wait a couple of weeks or a month. But it's not because of any interaction with the vaccine. It's just more trying to get as many people antibodies in their system as we can. So anybody that's had COVID within the past 90 days, we're asking you to hold off on getting the vaccine. Let somebody step in line ahead of you who doesn't have any antibodies.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Dr. Sharkey, this is Willie again, and I'm probably getting tired of me asking questions, but it looks like Kyle Martin had a question. It said, will after getting the vaccine change quarantine times if you start to get symptoms?
Great question. It will and it should. I don't know how fast the CDC and ADH is going to change those recommendations, because I just don't know how quickly that's going to change. For right now, assume they're going to stay the same. So you still want to wear your mask, stay away from people, try not to be on anybody's, contact list. You don't want to be the one that's within, 6 feet of somebody for more than 15 minutes, besides somebody in your household. So still be smart about it. By next April, May, yes, those recommendations will change as we have more people vaccinated. But for me, for y'all that are going to get vaccinated early, we just need to presume that the guidelines are going to stay the same for the next several months.
And just to expand on one thing you mentioned a minute ago about folks that have already contracted COVID, you feel like they probably need to wait that 90-day period. What about individuals that live in the household with them that potentially could have been exposed, and unbeknownst to them, do they need to get an antibodies test first, or how do you?
No, only we're just asking the people that if you've had it for sure within 90 days, then if you could wait and let other people go first to get the vaccine. But if household contacts that didn't have any symptoms, that never tested positive or didn't have any reason to test positive, go ahead and get the vaccine at your appointed time. Don't go ahead and get it. It's not going to hurt at all if you've had COVID and then you get the vaccine. Actually, your antibody levels after getting the vaccine, after having it, should just keep going up and up and up. So you're going to be even better protected.
And one other question, just to follow up on a question that I got from somebody right here.
Okay.
What's the reoccurrence of the vaccination, or do you just anticipate it being a one-time thing, kind of like the chickenpox?
We don't know yet, just because, we don't have anybody that got it 5 years ago to know, do we need to repeat annually? Do we need to do it like a tetanus every 10 years? We don't know yet. Time is going to tell on that, how long the immunity lasts from the vaccine. So still a lot to be determined.
That's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jimmy, why don't you ask your question? You got your hand up.
All right, sorry, I'm going to go back to the food allergies. I do have a food allergy to shellfish. It's not, I don't run around with an EpiPen, but it has increased as I've gotten older. But I was more willing to take on the vaccination and just be potentially most immediately monitored just in that fashion. Are you suggesting that I still hold off, or I just go on a pathway where I'm monitored?
Yeah. What is your reaction to shellfish? What's your worst one?
I'll get an upset stomach and pass out. I don't have an airway issue.
Yeah, no, I think you should go ahead and get it. All the vaccination sites are going to have EpiPens on site, and they're going to be monitoring everybody for 15 to 30 minutes afterwards. So I just, raise your hand when you're getting it and say, hey, I'm sticking around for a minute, have that EpiPen available. But with just a GI response, I think that I wouldn't have any heartburn about it. I'd vaccinate you.
Okay, thank you. Secondary, you were talking about the time period of us waiving potentially through. I would know just from local surveys that not everybody's going to jump and go and get it. So is it bad as a department like the fire department where we cohabitate, where we have 20% of us vaccinated and the others waiting? Is that going to have a negative effect on our situation, or is it not going to matter?
Well, ideally, I said to have herd immunity and to have herd immunity within your fire station, you have at least 70% vaccinated. So we, encourage as many as feel comfortable, and I'm hoping that I'm helping you with that, to get vaccinated as soon as possible so that we can keep everybody as safe as possible. Because when you get your vaccine, you're preventing, COVID within yourself, but you're also preventing, and again, some of the data is not fully known, but the hope is that you're preventing then, if you get it, passing it on to somebody else, that you are not going to unwittingly, be an asymptomatic person that's passing it. So we vaccinate not just to protect ourselves, but to protect those around us. It's really a community citizen reaction to this that we all need to step up and do our part, because we aren't going to get herd immunity if only 20% of us takes it. Then we're still living like this. We're still living with our mask and social distancing for years and years and years till we can get to that herd immunity. And nobody wants to do that. This is no fun. This is awful. I want out.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Sharkey?
Yes.
I'm Tracy Ashley. I'm the wife of Jeremy Ashley, and I'm sitting on here, so I appreciate your time and information today. I am a teacher here locally, and I have 2 autoimmune disease disorders. I'm really trying to research every type of vaccine that's on its way. I'm nervous about injecting a live virus, so any advice that you can give me, I would very much appreciate.
Right.
Thank you.
It really, what is the most important is if you're immunocompromised in any way, and I don't know if you're on any immunosuppressive medications, then we are recommending waiting on this vaccine if you're on anything. So I would encourage you to talk to your physician and going over what medications you're on and whether what you're doing to control your autoimmune disease is not suppressing your immune system so much that you would want to not get one of these. So that would be a one-on-one consultation with your doctor to figure that out. And then also to decide which vaccine is going to be the appropriate one for you, because you're one that's going to, for most of us, we're going to step up and I'm going to take whatever's on the shelf, whatever's first, but you're going to need to make a more detailed decision as which one's going to be appropriate for you. But again, the medications you're on that are keeping your autoimmune system at bay, unfortunately, are also, as you know, suppressing your immune system. So stay safe.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I don't see anybody's hands up. Well, it looks like Chris just sent one. Do we know if we pass on the first round, when there would be another chance? I don't know that there's a definitive answer to that, Chris.
Yeah, not a definitive answer right now. For instance, I'm very anxious because I'm going to be out of town January 2nd through the 9th, and I'm worried that that's going to be when I'm supposed to get vaccinated and what's going to happen if I'm not here to get it. So don't really have those answers yet. The supply chain is not, unfortunately, as robust as we were kind of promised and led to believe. We'll see how Moderna does and if Pfizer is able to ramp up more from what they're doing. But everybody's giving all the vaccine that they get when they get it shipped to them, and then waiting on the next round to show up when they do. I wish I had a more firm answer for you and for me to that very question.
This is Jimmy asking again. So with those questions, Chief, with the doctor here, is the city looking at a combination of using of a time period once the doses come in, working with the hospitals to set up like a wave approach here for fire and police and EMS in the Washington County area?
I think Marty can answer that question better than I. She's been involved in all those conversations, but it's my understanding that it's going to be the like Colliers, I think. I can't remember who the others are. I'll yield to you.
Yeah, it is. And actually, Chief Harden, what I would recommend you do is reach out to Colliers. I've been speaking with the different pharmacies. So there's pharmacies that we're calling tier 2 pharmacies. There's 6 of them in Washington County that have agreed to vaccinate first responders and healthcare workers such as myself that are not employed by the hospital. And they are all kind of going at it different ways. But Colliers, in my discussion with them today, Brad, is that they will come to the site and arrange vaccination clinics. And so I would think that would be the best partner for the city, for police and for fire.
Hey, Chief Harden, wasn't there an email from John Luther that said something to that nature of the potential for using some of our facilities as inoculation points?
Yes, the last I talked to John, so initially it was exactly as Jimmy had described, and we may have shared that previously, I don't remember, but it was the hospitals was the plan up until a couple weeks ago, and the Department of Health made the decision to partner with pharmacies. And I don't know why that change happened or occurred, but it did. And yes, Kyle did send out a document kind of stating that the plans are not rigid yet. We're going to, after this video concludes, meeting concludes, I'm going to send out this video along with a survey that I'm going to want everybody to answer as to whether or not you plan to take it. And then we will start developing some plans on how we're going to do this. So I wanted to have the numbers first, but I wanted to have everybody have the opportunity to know what it was that how they could answer, whether or not it was wise to take the vaccine or not. So that's where we stand.
Yeah, Brad, that came from actually the federal level, that it got switched to using the pharmacies in this way, as opposed to the hospitals and the clinics. Like we did H1N1, we didn't use the pharmacies for the last pandemic that we had. So this is a new distribution model. And so I fully expect lots of hiccups.
Dr. Sharkey, I got one more question for you, and you may or may not have any idea. Have you heard any dialogue, state level or federal level, that's going to require this in schools such as the University of Arkansas, to attend classes or public schools?
So because it's under Emergency Use Act, it cannot be required by any public entities. So the public schools, the universities, et cetera. However, private entities have already stated that they're going to require it. For example, Qantas Airlines is planning on requiring it before you fly. There will be private entities that require it, but right now under the Emergency Use Act, there will not be any requirements. And it's just as a general rule in our approach to that from a public health standpoint, we don't want to mandate. We'd rather everybody, hopefully get it willingly and not do mandates. And then we kind of use that way on the back end to try to, get the last laggard. So right now, that will not be happening. It will not be happening anytime soon. It may never happen. There's a potential for it, but right now there will be no mandates from any public institutions requiring it.
Anybody else?
Chief Harden, when you send your video out, is it okay if we share it with family and maybe our volunteer departments?
Share it with anybody that you want. And I'm going to send it out to John. I'm going to send it to the county. I'm going to send it to everybody that I can think of. So yes, please feel free.
Thank you, sir.
Is it okay to put it on social media sites, Chief Harden and Dr. Sharkey?
Yeah, it's fine. Just be prepared.
Thought I'd jump ahead of you there, Zach.
For the record, I don't read comments. It's not good for my mental health.
Does anybody else have any questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any others. One of the things you said about offsetting vaccinations, if there is going to be a effect, I mean, if we're going to see some sort of side effect from it, like you said, maybe a little bit of flu feeling or however, what would be the onset of that?
24 to 48 hours is what is being reported, and it's not lasting beyond that. So what the recommendations I have heard is staggering every 3 days to try and make sure that you don't have any holes in your staffing.
Okay. And I don't know that I have any other questions. And if nobody else has any questions, I guess that's all we have. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to visit with us and answer the questions. Very informative.
Thank you.
All right.
Good evening. Stay safe.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Everybody stay safe. See ya.